The story of Atlantis is familiar to most of the world from the dialogues of the Greek philosopher Plato. It seems obvious to us there are, in fact, many authoritative sources of the tale, not the least of which is the Bible itself. We have reported on many connections between Atlantean and biblical details. Here are just a few from the pages of Atlantis Rising Magazine. Atlantis and Ezekiel. In her 1888 theosophical treatise, The Secret Doctrine, Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky made the startling assertion that Ezekiel's account of Tyrus from the Old Testament was actually about Atlantis. A search of the literature on Atlantis reveals little or no information on this idea, nor does a review of modern Bible commentaries and other interpretative works. The New Interpreter's Bible (NIV), an encyclopedic reference intended primarily for clergy, provides a line-by-line interpretation of the entire Bible, along with overviews and summaries for each chapter. It's not surprising to learn that there is no mention of Atlantis, or Madame Blavatsky for that matter, in any of the commentaries on Tyrus or Ezekiel. The scholarly consensus on Tyrus is that Ezekiel was referring to the Phoenician city-state of Tyre, the site of which still exists on the coast of modern-day Lebanon, about 50 miles south of Beirut. Blavatsky's assertion about Tyrus sounds ridiculous in light of the commentaries. But a careful study of what is actually written about Tyrus in the Old Testament will lead to some intriguing observations. Many of the descriptions of Tyrus given by Ezekiel, and the other prophets as well, paint a picture of a city that was far different, both historically and geographically, than the Phoenician city of Tyre. Although similar in some respects, Ezekiel's Tyrus and the Phoenician Tyre seem to be two entirely different cities. What is even more intriguing is that Ezekiel's description of Tyrus closely resembles the Atlantis described by Plato and many others. At this point, it is important to be aware of the differences between the King James Version of the Bible, KJV, published in 1611, and the many modern translations produced since then. Much of the language of the KJV has been changed significantly in modern versions of the Bible, resulting in descriptions of Tyrus much different from what is found in the KJV, whose language has been altered so much that the connection between Tyrus and Atlantis has become obscure or completely invisible. What has happened is that modern translations have incorporated the assumption that Ezekiel's Tyrus was without a doubt the Phoenician city of Tyre, and the descriptions of the city have been changed accordingly. A key passage in Ezekiel that links Tyrus to Atlantis can be found in the description of the city's location given in Ezekiel 27:3. Here Tyrus is described as situated at the entry of the sea. This passage is important for two reasons. The first is that the sea mentioned is obviously the Mediterranean Sea, and, secondly, because the entrance of the Mediterranean Sea is the Strait of Gibraltar. Even more specifically, the entrance can be said to lie on the Atlantic side of the Strait of Gibraltar. Why is this important? Because this matches the exact location of Atlantis given by Plato in his dialogue, the Critias. Plato said that the farthest part of the island of Atlantis reached to just outside the Pillars of Hercules, what the ancient Greeks called the Strait of Gibraltar, and faced the area of southwest Spain that was at that time called Gadara. The New Interpreter's Bible commentary on the passage tells a different story. Ezekiel was said to be a master of metaphorical language and was, therefore, describing the Phoenician city of Tyre in a literary way. But the KJV passage is not written in the form of a metaphor and doesn't really match the actual geographical circumstances of the Phoenician city. The city of Tyre lay on a small island, about a mile in length, and was situated a few hundred yards. Voodoo husband even it bothered best with scent, look, and off the coast of present-day Lebanon, which of course lies on the easternmost shore of the Mediterranean Sea. It's not really the entrance to anything. The assumption that Tyrus was the Phoenician city of Tyre can readily be seen incorporated into the New International Version, NIV, of the Bible from 1978. The same passage describes the city, now referred to as Tyre, as situated at the gateway of the sea. Although this new translation more aptly and metaphorically describes the Phoenician city, it's not really the same as what's written in the KJV. Two other passages from the King James Bible support Blavatsky's idea that Tyrus was actually located outside the Strait of Gibraltar. Jeremiah 25:22 says that the kings of Tyrus, the kings of Zidon, and the kings of the isles were beyond the sea, which is very similar to Ezekiel's description for the location of Tyrus. Isaiah 23:6, which is from Isaiah's shorter but similar version of Ezekiel's account of Tyrus, urges the inhabitants of the isle to pass over to Tarshish in order to avoid their imminent destruction. Tarshish is usually associated with the Roman city of Tartessos and was thought to be located in southwest Spain near present-day Cadiz, the same region that Plato said faced Atlantis. This then prompts the following question: if Ezekiel's Tyrus really was the Phoenician city of Tyre, as scholars say, why would the inhabitants of the island, facing their imminent destruction, set sail for Tarshish, a distance of over 2,000 miles to the west across the Mediterranean Sea and through the Strait of Gibraltar? Why not simply cross over to the mainland of what is now Lebanon, a few hundred yards away? Isaiah 23:6 makes much more sense if Tyrus was located just outside the Strait of Gibraltar, as Ezekiel seems to describe. Throughout his account of Tyrus, Ezekiel used the phrase "in the midst of the seas" more than a half dozen times to describe the location of the island. It doesn't really match the actual geographical circumstances of the Phoenician city of Tyre. Metaphorical license aside, a small island only a few hundred yards offshore and in relatively shallow coastal waters can hardly be described over and over again as lying in the midst of the seas. It seems unlikely that a supposed master of metaphor such as Ezekiel would overuse such a phrase in that manner. The city of Cadiz, mentioned earlier, has an interesting history. One of the oldest cities in Europe, it is included by Strabo in his work Geography. Its ancient name was Gades, derived from the name of the surrounding region Plato referred to as Gadara. Plato said this region in turn was named after Gadarus, the original king of the nearby part of Atlantis that reached almost to the Strait of Gibraltar. Noting their similarities, is it a stretch to assume that the name of Tyrus was also derived from Gadarus and that the city may have been a wealthy port on the coast of Atlantis facing Gibraltar? Tyrus and Atlantis were both described as fabulously wealthy mercantile cities. Plato said the wealth of Atlantis was greater than that of any previous dynasty of kings or likely to be accumulated by any later, and that because of the extent of their power they received many imports. He also described in great detail the royal city of Atlantis. The massive temple of Poseidon was covered inside and out with silver and gold. The wall surrounding the Acropolis was fused over with the mysterious metal orichalc, which Plato said was second in value only to gold. Ezekiel gave similar descriptions for the wealth of Tyrus and its extensive trade. Tyrus was a merchant of the people for many isles, and it enriched the kings of the earth with the multitude of its riches and of its merchandise. Now, it's true that the Phoenicians were very wealthy due to their extensive commerce. It can be argued just as easily that Tyrus was actually the Phoenician city that scholars say it was. However, the following description of Tyrus from Zechariah 9:3 is more reminiscent of Plato's Atlantis than it is of a wealthy Phoenician city. It reads, "And Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as the dust, and fine gold as the mire of the streets." Ezekiel's prophecy for the destruction of Tyrus matches Plato's account of the destruction of Atlantis so closely that the two narratives are virtually identical. This is the case even though Plato's date for the destruction of Atlantis, around 9500 BC, is far older than the date of Ezekiel's prophecy from about 600 BC. Plato also wrote that the island of Atlantis was overwhelmed by dreadful earthquakes and floods and was then swallowed up by the sea and vanished. The sunken island was the source of the impenetrable mud which prevents the free passage of those who sail out of the straits into the open sea. Ezekiel's prophecy of destruction reads much the same. The Lord would bring up the deep upon Tyrus, great waters would cover it, Tyrus would fall into the midst of the seas in the day of its ruin, and it would be broken by the seas in the depths of the waters. One passage, Ezekiel 26 verse 21, seems particularly relevant today. "I will make thee a terror, and thou shalt be no more. Though thou be sought for, yet shall never be found again, saith the Lord God." It's a pretty accurate description even now of the intense interest in finding historical evidence of Atlantis. One of the most intriguing prophecies concerning the destruction of Tyrus can be found in Ezekiel 28 verse 16, where we learn that the city will be destroyed from the midst of the stones of fire. The NIV commentary notes that some language experts think the phrase stones of fire should be translated as firestones. These words should sound familiar to students of Edgar Cayce's work. He said that during the latter days of Atlantis, the word firestone was the name used for the crystal which was the source of their power, and that the later misuse of the crystal led to their ultimate destruction. It was also known as the terrible crystal in earlier times, a phrase that also appears in the first chapter of Ezekiel, not in connection with Tyrus, but in his vision of the flying wheel. In Ezekiel 28 verse 16, the destruction of Tyrus seems to be associated with these mysterious stones of fire or firestones. Was Ezekiel really talking about the terrible crystal and the destruction of Atlantis here? The conventional explanation of this passage is rather more mundane in nature. From the NIV commentary we learn that the exact meaning of the phrase stones of fire is unclear, and that it may refer to the red-hot coals surrounding a sacrificial temple fire. Aside from Ezekiel, and scattered references to the city throughout the other prophetic books, Isaiah 23 contains the next longest account of Tyrus. Although Isaiah obviously describes the same city as Ezekiel, he refers to it as Tyre in his account and speaks of the city in the past tense, as already destroyed. This is somewhat odd, because Ezekiel was believed to have conducted his prophetic ministry around 600 BC, and Isaiah was thought to have lived about 100 years earlier. Even more fascinating, however, are the series of events described in Isaiah 24. This chapter chronicles a devastating apocalypse upon the earth. Even though Tyrus is not mentioned here, Isaiah 24 seems to be a continuation of the previous chapter about the city, because many of the apocalyptic events he describes are similar to Ezekiel's prophecy for the destruction of the city. The NIV commentary says that Isaiah 24 is probably based on some unknown event long before Isaiah's time. They don't speculate on what that event was, but it's doubtful the destruction of Atlantis was one of their choices. When the characteristics of these apocalyptic events are examined, and the fact that they immediately follow the chapter about Tyrus, what better event could Isaiah have been describing other than the destruction of Atlantis? Isaiah wrote that the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. This is similar to Ezekiel and Zechariah, both of whom described the destruction of Tyrus by fire. It's also reminiscent of the words of the psychic Ruth Montgomery, who said that prior to the sinking of Atlantis, massive volcanic eruptions occurred along the Atlantic ridge. Isaiah also alluded to a deluge, saying that the inhabitants of the earth have broken the everlasting covenant and later that the windows on high are open. The NIV commentary explains that this is a reference to the covenant God made with Noah never to inflict another flood upon the earth. What is interesting here is that God didn't break the covenant this time. It was man himself who broke the covenant and defiled the earth and transgressed the laws. This is similar to Plato's reason for the destruction of Atlantis. Mankind had degenerated because of its pursuit of unbridled ambition and power and therefore brought down the wrath of Zeus upon itself. It's also similar to the reason Ezekiel gave for the destruction of Tyrus. The prince of Tyrus had become corrupt and violent because of his wealth and in his arrogance, thought of himself as a god. Finally, Isaiah describes what seems to be a pole shift but which the NIV interprets simply as a massive earthquake. Isaiah wrote, "The earth is turned upside down, it shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, it shall be removed like a cottage, the Lord will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place." Isaiah ends the chapter saying the moon shall be confounded and the sun ashamed. This last part describes what an observer on earth might see if he looked towards the sky while the earth's crust shifted beneath his feet. Many people believe that a pole shift marked the end of Atlantis. In their book, When the Earth Nearly Died, D.S. Allen and J.B. Dallaire have compiled a massive amount of evidence that such an event took place at the end of the last ice age. This occurred around 10,000 BC, which coincides with the date Plato and others have ascribed for the destruction of Atlantis. Remains of the Phoenician city of Tyre still exist on the coast of Lebanon, and it has been designated a World Heritage Site. No longer an island, it long ago became connected to the mainland, and is now part of the modern city of Sur. It seems that Ezekiel's prophecy has never come to pass, if Tyrus was in fact the Phoenician city scholars say it was. If Tyrus really was Atlantis, however, as Madame Blavatsky said, then Ezekiel's prophecy of destruction has long since been fulfilled. Only time and new evidence of Atlantis will prove if she was right.
For a quarter century, Atlantis Rising Magazine has been the go-to source for news of ancient mysteries, unexplained anomalies, holistic health, and future science, appearing on newsstands worldwide. Visit AtlantisRising.com, become a member of the Atlantis Rising Research Group and join the team.
Prophecies and the Third Temple. There is perhaps no more iconic a vision than the old city walls of Jerusalem surrounding the golden-topped dome of the rock. People from around the world travel there to both connect with history and seek a religious experience. However, in recent years, there has been an amplification of end-times fervor associated with the spot. Increasing numbers of Christians and Jews believe the long-prophesied end of days will soon take place in Jerusalem, specifically on the Temple Mount, a place Time magazine has called the most volatile 35 acres on earth. They cite numerous ancient prophecies, all of which point to the imminent building of the third Jewish temple and appearance of the Messiah, the Anointed One in Hebrew. Their fulfillment, it's claimed, will herald Judgment Day and the end of the current sinful age. Religious Jews pray daily, may the Holy Temple be rebuilt speedily and in our day. Christians, meanwhile, see the temple as necessary before the second coming of Jesus, their Messiah, and are eager to assist Jewish groups to serve their own ends. Muslims, meanwhile, are wary of any of these efforts, since they actively threaten their own shrines on the Mount. King Solomon built the first temple to Yahweh on the Mount 3,000 years ago. It was destroyed by the Babylonians 400 years later, but rebuilt 70 years after as the Second Temple. Centuries later, King Herod renovated the temple in the years before Jesus' birth, greatly increasing its size. Only decades later, it was razed to the ground in 70 CE by the Romans during the First Jewish War. Ever since then, Jews hoped that a third temple would someday be built, and that sacrifices might be resumed. Despite brief attempts at building this third temple, most notably during the apostasy of Roman Emperor Julian in 360 CE, there has not yet been a concerted effort in modern history to build it, at least not until the last few decades. Journalist Gershom Gurenberg sums up the unique role of the Temple Mount in end-time scenarios best. What happens at that one spot, more than anywhere else, quickens expectations of the end in three religions. And at that spot, the dangers of provoking catastrophe are greatest. It is perhaps the greatest flashpoint for war in the world, and has in recent years become the focus of several Jewish movements and fervent Christian messianism, all aimed at actively preparing the way for the Third Temple. Momentous events of recent years have caused many to renew their faith that the end of days is finally at our collective doorstep. Prophecies fulfilled. The foremost prophecy regarding the end of days was the return of the exiles to Israel after the Great Jewish Diaspora. The Zionists in the late 19th century were mostly secular and wanted to create a socialist and humanist nation. A small group of religious Zionists, however, saw the path to Israel as the path towards the Temple, Messiah, and redemption. They celebrated the watershed year of 1948 and the declaration of Israel as a sign that God's kingdom was at long last finally at hand. The exiles had been allowed to return home, fulfilling the words of Jeremiah, "I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and will bring them back to their pasture." 23:3, and Isaiah, "He will raise a banner for the nations, and gather the exiles of Israel." 11:12. This seemed to be just the beginning. During the Six-Day War, Israel seized back control of East Jerusalem from Arab forces. "The Temple Mount is in our hands," exclaimed Paratroop Brigade Commander Madiger on June 6, 1967. For the first time in 2,000 years, the sacred space was back in direct control of Jewish forces, marking a fundamental regime change and prophetic realization. Many expected a miracle to occur that very day. Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goren repeatedly blew the shofar horn and demanded the Dome of the Rock be demolished immediately. Fortunately, calmer heads prevailed, and the Arab Religious Trust was allowed to continue administering the site, out of fear that if it didn't, a regional war might erupt. In the 12th century CE, the great Jewish sage Maimonides wrote about the end of days, claiming two things would precede it. First, the Sanhedrin, the ancient Jewish council of elders, would be reconvened. It had been dissolved in 425 CE. Then, in October 2004, after almost 1,700 years, it was miraculously revived, fulfilling the words of Isaiah, "I will restore your leaders as in days of old, your rulers as at the beginning." 1:26. Second, the red heifer must appear. In Jewish custom, the ashes of a completely red heifer were used to purify the priests. The last red heifer, the ninth since Moses' time, died during the time of the Second Temple. It was prophesied by Maimonides that the 10th red heifer will be accomplished by the King, the Messiah, may he be revealed speedily, Amen. That is why there was such excitement at the news that just such a pure red bovine had been born in Israel in September 2018. Meanwhile, biblical tailor Reuven Prager has been busy issuing silver half-shekel coins. They are meant for religious Jews to send to the future temple. The Sanhedrin and Mikdash Educational Center are also minting Third Temple coins. One features the Persian King Cyrus and Donald Trump, who has been likened to Cyrus for his role in assisting the Jewish people. He moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in late 2017, precisely to fulfill the ancient prophecy, "But now I have chosen Jerusalem for my name to be there." 2 Chronicles 6 verse 6. This greatly energized his evangelical Christian base, roughly 700 million strong, that see it as preceding the return of Jesus. To add to this messianic furor, there were several strange portents around the mount in 2018. In July, a large stone block fell from the western wall, the day after Tisha B'Av, which is the day of Jewish mourning for the temple. Then, in October, a large group of Jews praying on the Mount of Olives witnessed a white cloud rise up and surround the Dome of the Rock. This occurred just after sunrise, the time of highest religious focus, and lasted over 20 minutes. It took place on Hosanna Rabbah, the last day of the week-long holiday of Sukkot, the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles. This is important because it is believed that on this day the Messiah will appear to the world. Then, weeks later in November, a snake emerged from the western wall. Most saw it as a positive sign, since the numerical value of the Hebrew word for snake, Naash, is the same as Messiah, Messiah. Meanwhile, a few days later, a sinkhole opened up near the Golden Gate on the eastern side of the mount. The Messiah is supposed to enter through this gate, which was sealed in 1541 CE specifically to prevent his return. While archaeologists point to the ground itself, packed with centuries of random debris, as the likely cause, others see it as a sign the gate may soon be opened. Yet others expect an earthquake to open the gate. In July 2018, geologist Ariel Hymon warned that the threat of an earthquake is, in my eyes, the greatest threat facing the state of Israel. Don't amanatize the Eschaton. Traditional Judaism has always counseled patience concerning the end of days, claiming the Messiah would build the temple in his own time. Orthodox rabbis opposed the Zionists a century ago for trying to force God's hand concerning the redemption, and even today, most rabbis forbid Jews from visiting the Mount, out of fear of violating ancient purity laws. They argue that a natural act of God, a miracle such as an earthquake, should clear the way for the temple. As journalist Mahdi Anbari notes, the conservative Jew prefers to remain within his own four walls and await the miracle that will transfer him from exile to redemption. That all changed in 1967, when the Mount returned to Israeli hands and building the temple finally became a tangible possibility. John Chambers wrote in Atlantis Rising, number 119, that during this time, a great host of apocalyptic yearnings that had lain dormant for centuries burst into the open. Fundamentalist Jewish and Christian groups tried to kickstart the redemption, often provoking violent responses. German philosopher Erich Voegelin saw these attempts as trying to amanatize the Eschaton, the final redemptive stage of human history, rushing the end so to speak. Two of the paratroopers who expected a miracle that day on the Mount in 1967 did not abandon their beliefs when faced with failure, but doubled down on them. They went on to found movements to re-establish the Temple Mount Faithful, and the Temple Institute. Both are still active, with the TMF being the more incendiary. They sparked riots in 1990 when they tried to lay a cornerstone for a future temple. The Temple Institute, meanwhile, has avoided clashes with police and focused instead on fashioning replicas of ancient temple implements and clothes. They have also trained over 500 Levite priests for future services. If a new temple were to be built, they are now completely ready to outfit and staff it. Other groups took a more violent path. When Israel surrendered the Sinai in 1979, several Jewish radicals formed the Jewish Underground. They plotted to blow up the Dome of the Rock to prepare the way for the temple. Fortunately, these plots were stopped before a war erupted. Sadly, such radical ideas have helped inspire a new crop of right-wing politicians, such as Knesset member Yehuda Glick. A contentious presence on the Mount through the 2010s, Glick has been leading groups of fellow Jews in prayer there. After pushing and pushing, Muslim forces pushed back, and he was shot 4 times by an Arab terrorist on October 29, 2014. Miraculously, Glick survived and continues, undeterred, with his push to the Mount. With his and many others' vocal encouragement, Jews are ascending the Mount as never before. In 2006, the Council of Yeshiva Rabbis stunned the world by permitting Jews to enter the Mount, and by 2017, almost 26,000 Jews had visited there. With all this push comes the inevitable pushback. When PM Ariel Sharon visited the Mount in 2000, he unknowingly sparked the Al-Aqsa Intifada, which ultimately claimed the lives of over 4,000 people. These fundamentalist Jewish groups, along with Christian evangelicals, seek a return to the former monarchy, the Sanhedrin, and the sacrifices. That intention puts them on a collision course not only with the Muslim world, but also mainstream Israeli society, which seeks a pluralistic social democracy modeled after similar European nations. Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein reiterated the idea during Israel's 70th birthday celebrations in May 2018. Together, we have developed a democratic oasis, a wonderful mosaic of tribes and colors, beliefs and opinions, countries of origin, and ways of life, and together we have transformed our tiny country into a global technological power that is led by justice and morality. Problems with prophecy and the path to peace. The first problem with prophecies, researchers argue, is their wildly variable interpretations. Dozens of prophets, spanning millennia of socio-political change, have spoken, and the people read into their messages whatever they have chosen. It is clear now that most were not speaking of events in our future, but in their future, now long in the past. For example, despite the current push to reinstitute temple sacrifices, many point to prophets like Hosea, who long ago rejected the validity of burnt offerings, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice." 6:6. A far greater problem, it is argued, lies in prophecy's ability to justify violence. It has time and again been used to inflame tensions and precipitate war. Zechariah warned us that God will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. Jesus likewise cautioned his disciples of the end-time tribulations to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Most of these current zealots see a global conflagration as the only way towards a new age. They want a war. However, there are an equal number of verses that espouse peace. Isaiah once imagined the temple would be a house of prayer for all nations, 56:7, and the Messiah will be a banner of salvation to all the world. 11:10. Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, believed something similar. In his novel Old New Land in 1902, Herzl laid out his vision for the future of the Jewish people. He foresaw an Israel full of technology, prosperity, equal rights for all its citizens, and a Temple Mount marked by peace and plurality. Most importantly, it did not require a global war to attain it. Listen to his dream for the future city. Jerusalem and her hills were still sacred to all mankind, still bore the tokens of reverence bestowed upon her through the ages. But something had been added: new, vigorous, joyous life. The Holy Sepulchre, the Mosque of Omar, and other domes and towers had remained the same, but many splendid new structures had been added. That magnificent new edifice was the Peace Palace. Herzl's utopian vision is not new. It was an old Jewish idea that originated with Moses. Long before even the first temple, he had commanded Israel, "The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the Israelite among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Leviticus 19 verse 34. Religious devotees stress that this idea of a peaceful utopia must necessarily involve the pluralistic views of Moses, Isaiah, and Herzl. They envision Herzl's shimmering peace palace standing beside the golden dome of the rock, a house of prayer for all nations, and suggest it would be the ultimate example of cooperation, in accordance with the teachings of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, who likewise called for peace with Jews and Christians, the people of the book.
For a quarter century, Atlantis Rising Magazine has been the go-to source for news of ancient mysteries, unexplained anomalies, holistic health, and future science, appearing on newsstands worldwide. Visit AtlantisRising.com, become a member of the Atlantis Rising Research Group and join the team. Legend of the Three Marys. The Acts of the Apostles describes the days and weeks after the crucifixion. Jesus was dead and the apostles and his closest companions were stunned. What was the next step? Where the Acts leaves off, legend takes over. According to the Golden Legend, the stoning of the first Christian martyr Saint Stephen was the writing on the wall. The followers of Jesus were in danger. They had to leave Palestine. According to the 13th century Italian chronicler Jacob Voragini, author of the Golden Legend, a handful took to the sea in a rudderless raft, later translated as a radeau. The passengers included Mary Magdalene, her servant Martilla, Mary Salome, Mary the mother of James, Lazarus, who Jesus had brought back from the dead, Martha, the sister of Lazarus, and Sarah, described as a dark Egyptian servant. Without rudder or oars, they were guided by the hand of God through the perilous seas if the Golden Legend is correct. They landed at a place named Rithys, near Marseille in France. They took refuge under a porch of a temple of the people of that country. What Voragini does not say is that it was a temple to three goddesses. He was writing in an era where pagans and their goddesses were forced to assimilate into Christianity. Rithys, later renamed Les Saintes Marie de la Mer, became the cradle of Christianity in France. The authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail introduced the world to the importance of that seemingly unimportant town of Rennes-le-Château not far from Rithys. The town where a certain Father Berenger Saunier would go from impoverished priest to millionaire in a few short years because of secrets he uncovered. The town was known alternately as Reedy and Raises. It was in the center of a kingdom once known as Septimania, where a king of the Jews was said to live. The conclusion of that book was that one of the three Marys, the Magdalene, had carried the child of Jesus. Heirs of that child then became a dynasty in hiding with a bloodline to David. In modern times, it is hard to separate fact from legend. When religion is added, it becomes extremely difficult. The legend in the medieval period. Lazarus, it is said, moved to Marseille where he preached to the pagans and converted many to Christianity. He survived the persecution of Nero and went on to become the first bishop of Marseille. He didn't survive the persecution of Domitian. He was arrested and beheaded in a cave under what became the prison of Saint Lazare. Martha settled in the small town which was later named Tarascon. Here she bested the Tarasque, a dragon who lived in the Rhone and plagued the town. It is unknown where the mythical creature came from, but it had a turtle-like body, 6 short legs, and a scaly scorpion tail. While the king's knights could not defeat it, Martha charmed the beast with hymns and prayers. The townspeople then killed it. Her feat is celebrated every year in a colorful annual pageant on the last Sunday in June. As penance for killing it even after it was tamed, the people changed the town's name to honor the dragon. While this legend seems to be more of a fable with an allegorical lesson, it has become more important over the years. A 15-foot model of the Green Dragon is paraded through the town, and the parade is followed by concerts, fireworks, and a historical reenactment of the event. 2 of the 3 Marys faded into obscurity while the importance of the Magdalene grew. Mary Magdalene preached the word of Jesus. When a local prince and his wife could not conceive, she told them if they would stop worshipping pagan idols and persecuting Christians, she would intervene. The bargain was struck. It was her first miracle, and she continued to perform miracles until she was too old. Then she settled in a grotto at St. Baume, a name that might relate to her anointing Jesus with a holy balm. She was buried at St. Maximin, where from the early 5th century a small group of monks became the guardians of her remains. Under her basilica was a much older Gallo-Roman sanctuary, again putting a Christian figure over a former pagan goddess. Such practice is most evident in Rome, where one landmark, Santa Maria sopra Minerva, shows in its name it was literally built sopra Minerva, or over Minerva, the goddess of Rome. While the mother of Jesus, the Blessed Virgin Mary, might be the most significant woman in Christianity, Mary Magdalene might have been the most significant woman among French Christians. Many believe the appellation Notre Dame, Our Lady, refers to her and not the mother of Jesus. The Cistercian monks, allied closely with the Knights Templar, declared themselves to be the Knights of Our Lady. Instead of the New Testament version that brands Mary a sinner from whom Jesus had to cast out demons, other traditions exist. Rabanus, the Archbishop of Mainz, wrote in the 9th century that she had been wealthy, highborn, and amassed further wealth beyond that of her family through buying properties. For her faith she had sacrificed all of this and became a refugee. In Charlemagne's time, her remains were said to have been moved to Vézelay in Burgundy. Here the relics of Our Lady still performed miracles. It is said a man left his list of sins in her church. He prayed for forgiveness. The next day he went back to her church and the list was blank. His sins were gone. Vézelay became a rival site to Les Saints Marie de la Mer, and Pope Eugenius III and Saint Bernard preached the need for crusade at her shrine. This most remarkable era had seen the combined Cistercian and Templar orders fighting for the Holy Land while building cathedrals all over Europe. As East met West, legends were filtered through an expansive knowledge that had flowed back to Europe. Europe emerged from the Dark Ages, thanks to the import of books of the Greeks and Egyptians which may have been forgotten or ignored for centuries. The legend in ancient times. When Jacob put his golden legend to paper, he may have been aware of a more ancient origin. In the Egyptian Book of the dead enter a boat that is without sail with only an image of Ra to guide them. That boat is the Rado or Rithys, and Les Saints Marie de la Mer may have actually already existed as the place of Ra or Rithys. The porch over the heads of the three Marys was a Gallo-Roman temple dedicated to three goddesses. In 4 BC, Isis, Pelagia, Cybele and Artemis were those goddesses. Cybele was regarded as a mother goddess and often depicted with her dying son, Attis. Those who view the sculptures of Cybele and Attis cannot be faulted for believing they are seeing Mary and Jesus post-crucifixion. Christianity did all it could to drive her out of the public consciousness. Her most famous temple was in the Vatican, where it is now under St. Peter's Basilica. Artemis was the moon goddess whose most famous shrine was in the city of Ephesus. Once Christianity became dominant, this temple was destroyed, and it was claimed that Mary, mother of Jesus, had moved to that city. Her house can be seen today. Isis Pelagia is the goddess of the seas. She protects sailors and sea travelers from disaster. A coin of Syme, an Asia Minor city, depicts her standing in a boat. The Egyptians regarded Isis as the mother of all. Her son was Ra. Her cult was popular in Rome circa 80 BC and spread through Europe. One of the numerous titles of Isis was Stella Maris, Star of the Sea. She traveled in her own rudderless boat, which actually was the crescent moon. Did the Christian legends actually incorporate the pagan triple goddess into the legend of the three Marys? The early Christian church was not in favor of a feminine entity in any form being regarded as sacred. Church Father Epiphanius said, "Let the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be worshipped, not Mary." She was not, he declared, the Mother of God. Anastasius said she was just a woman. The Eastern Christian churches replaced a triple goddess, or a trinity of goddesses, with a Father, Mother, Son trinity. Rome, however, made no allowance for the feminine, and Sophia, once the spirit of sacred wisdom, simply became the Holy Spirit, or more inexplicably, the Holy Ghost. Eastern influence adds to the legend. In more modern times, the most celebrated passenger to land at Saints Marie de la Mar became Sarah. Gypsies claim that Sarah was not actually Egyptian but a gypsy Sarah la Kali, meaning Sarah the Black. The shrine to her is a pilgrimage spot sacred to her. Under the choir of her shrine is a crypt where her relics are preserved. The crypt contains a statue of her garbed in 7 robes, implying that she is more important than simply a servant. The statue has been kissed so many times the black paint is coming off. In 1686 the servant Sarah actually became a saint, and the cult objects were put in the crypt. Every year, gypsies flock from around the world for a 2-day celebration, May 23rd and 25th, that includes flamenco, bullfights, horse races, and a more serious all-night candle procession. The story of Saint Sarah might again have much older connotations. Sarah recalls the Hindu goddess Kali. Sarah Kali became Queen Kali of the Gypsies. They may have actually originated in the Hindustan region. They appeared in 10th century Persia and were known as Kalandaris. As Kali Ma, she was the triple goddess of creation, preservation, and the destroyer. Later, Brahmins, like the Christian fathers in Rome, gave these aspects to Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, Shiva the destroyer. The feminine goddess was, however, never erased by succeeding religion. In the Sinai Peninsula, priestesses of the moon goddess called themselves Kalu. In Ireland, pagan priestesses were known as Kellys. The goddess then is the source of the name Kelly and possibly the name behind the Book of Kells. The continent had a Saxon goddess Kale who was regarded as Mother Earth. The goddess, hidden in Christianity. The church had always attempted to assimilate the gods of the past into Christianity. Pagan sites regularly became Christian sites. Pagan myths became Christian stories. Is it possible that in preserving in secret the role of the goddess, some church leaders actually believed in the same gods and goddesses they attempted to eliminate? Saint Bernard had a fascination with the Black Virgin shrines that existed throughout Europe. Such sites originated in the 12th century and could not be explained by the church as to what they implied. Some believe they were originally shrines to Isis, often depicted with child, or Cybele, or Artemis. Diana is another choice, as she is sometimes called the Queen of the Witches. Ian Begg, author of The Cult of the Black Virgin, found 50 Black Virgin sites where the Magdalene was worshipped. His book discusses that such sites are often chosen for meetings of the Order of the Priory Notre Dame of Chaon. The group was forced to the spotlight when Holy Blood, Holy Grail was published. While some of the source material for the Priory of Chaon was discredited, much of it pointed to a reality that was hardly a secret within the Catholic Church. Saint Bernard was devoted to Mary Magdalene and picked Vézelay to be the place to preach the Second Crusade. It was he who claimed that God's secrets existed in the science of geometry. Bernard declared, "What is God? He is length, width, height, and depth." The Feast of the Magdalene was July 22nd. Expressed as 22:7 or 22/7, it gives us that most important concept of pi. The shrines built by the Templars and Cistercians from Mellifont to Tomar to the tiny Baltic island of Bornholm would often incorporate both the octagon and the circle. They were notably built after the famous mosque in Damascus and the St. John Church in Rome, meaning such science was not truly forgotten. The Gypsies claim that all the cathedrals of France were arranged to show an earthly reflection of the constellation Virgo. While at one time that might have seemed far-fetched, recently David Oveson's The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital exposed the numerous zodiacs and hidden cosmological symbolism built into Washington, D.C. He also discussed the role of Virgo in determining not only the placement of major structures but also their dedication dates. The importance of Virgo, and her connections with the Egyptian goddess Isis, had been recognized in Masonic circles from the very early days of America. The far-off, quaint myth history of a tiny coastal village in the south of France may conceal much greater and more ancient secrets as well. For a quarter century, Atlantis Rising Magazine has been the go-to source for news of ancient mysteries, unexplained anomalies, holistic health, and future science, appearing on newsstands worldwide. Visit AtlantisRising.com. Become a member of the Atlantis Rising Research Group and join the team. The Way of St. James. Was it sacred, or a cover for the profane? By Stephen Sara. The birth of tourism was the holy pilgrimage of long ago. In the medieval world, Jerusalem was the focal point for Christians, but after losing that sacred destination to Islam, a place in Spain took over the role. The Camino de Santiago, starting in what is now the south of France and ending in the Cathedral of Santiago near the Atlantic coast of Spain, became the #1 pilgrim destination of the time. Santiago actually is the Spanish term for the Apostle Saint James. The Camino de Santiago is often referred to simply as the Way. Saint James was one of the first apostles mentioned in the Bible and was called Saint James the Greater in contrast to Saint James the Lesser, who was the brother of Jesus. He was also known as James, son of Zebedee. James was a fisherman with a boat on the lake of Gennesareth. The Bible says he was repairing his nets with the man who became Saint John the Evangelist, when Jesus came by and asked both of them to become fishers of men. After the crucifixion, says tradition, he sailed to Spain to spread the word. Near Saragossa, it is said, the Blessed Virgin, aka Mother Mary, appeared to him. Most likely she was still in physical embodiment and not yet assumed into heaven. In any case, a chapel was built to honor her. 16 feet long and 8 feet wide, it was the first such shrine built for Mary. By the time of the Crusades, it had been rebuilt as a huge domed basilica with, interestingly, the same dimensions as the temple of the goddess Artemis at Ephesus. In AD 431, the mother of Jesus was officially declared the Mother of God, and the Temple of Artemis was rededicated to Mary. Such renamings would be a recurring theme in the ongoing history of Christianity, pagan gods and heroes being replaced by saints. James returned to Palestine after a year and was martyred by the Roman Herod Agrippa. He was the first apostle to be executed. His followers then brought his body back to Spain. Visigoths, Vandals, Byzantines, and finally in 711, the Moors would overrun Spain. Charles Martel would halt the Moorish advance at the Battle of Tours, but it would be centuries before Crusaders pushed them out of Spain. During the Moorish occupation, the tomb of James was discovered in the year 813. Over the next 300 years, masses of pilgrims would walk the way, and it is estimated that as many as 500,000 undertook the trek in medieval times, while 200,000 still walk the way today. At the time of the rediscovery of James' burial site, the Moors held North Africa and most of the Iberian Peninsula. Spain became a center of learning, and schools of Jewish teaching, Islamic science, and Christian religion thrived side by side. Gothic armies never stopped trying to oust the Moors, and the period from 718 to 1516 became known as the Reconquista, recovery by the Christian kingdoms. The victory at Tours encouraged the Crusaders, who then attempted to drive the Moors out of Europe altogether. The battle cry was Santiago de Compostela. It was believed by some to mean St. James the Apostle, but Compostela actually means field of stars. To many, the story seems like just that. The Catholic Church had a habit of converting places that were sacred to the goddess to the sacred persons of Christianity. Celtic sites would be assimilated to convert the indigenous population. Holy places of the old pagan worship would be transferred to the new. In many cases, even the old symbols were converted. In Spain, the Brigantine goddess of the sea was, as in Ireland, Bridget. This Celtic goddess had as a symbol the scallop shell, which had a distinct fertility and pagan implication. This same goddess symbol is famously incorporated in Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Today, churches that have survived for centuries in places like the Balearic Isles have holy water fountains shaped like scallops where the devout dip their fingers and cross their foreheads. The goddess Brigid became the Christian Saint Bridget and kept the same feast day. Bridget's sacred flame at Kildare in Ireland became St. Bridget's sacred flame. Did James take the starring role away from the goddess? In the shrine to James at Compostela, he is seated on a throne with scallop shells decorating his cape. Tourists can climb behind the altar and kiss the shells. They are allowed to buy scallop shells and bring them home. It just might have been that the story of James was created to provide a rallying point for the soldiers who would battle the Islamic invaders. Following a woman might not have been manly enough. The reward. The Way, like other pilgrimages, offers great rewards. For Catholics, completing the walk, it grants relief from half of the time one must spend in purgatory, the limbo between death and heaven. The existence of purgatory/limbo has come into question, but the Catholic Church remains firm. Purgatory as a place or a state exists. The official catechism of the Catholic Church states all who die in God's grace and friendship will, after death, undergo purification. It is not similar to undergoing the pain of hell, but still a prolonged condition. The word for this state only came into use around the year 1200. The Catholic tradition of this transitional condition has existed since the death of Jesus. It exists in other religions as well, as evidenced by the widespread practice of caring and praying for the dead. For Catholics, if one completes the walk in a Jubilee year, all time in purgatory is cancelled. While members of other religions find solace in walking the way, only Catholics are rewarded with time off purgatory. To many, that doesn't matter. In a movie about the Camino de Santiago, titled The Way, Martin Sheen plays a doctor whose friends chide him he has no soul. His son dies on the first day of walking the way, so the Sheen character decides to walk the Camino to leave his son's ashes, thus completing the walk for him. Over the next 6 weeks, he meets an angry divorced woman who says she is doing it to quit smoking. He meets an overweight man who wants to lose weight. And he meets a writer who has writer's block and is doing it for the inspiration. The places that are made destinations for pilgrims also receive rewards, tourist dollars. In medieval times, towns and their cathedrals competed for the most important saintly relics. Such objects were bought and sold and often stolen, as the more famous, the more pilgrim customers. Many, of course, were fakes. Martin Luther asked how it came to pass that 18 apostles are buried in Germany when Christ chose only 12? The way. To walk the way, one begins in the tiny town of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in the French Pyrenees. Here the 500-mile trek starts crossing the Pyrenees, Basque Country, the Navarre-Rioja regions, Castile-Leon, and Galicia before reaching the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. Most of the way is made up of footpaths, making travel impossible by auto. Then again, auto traffic would not make anything sacred. To make the pilgrimage officially, the first hurdle is a long hilly climb through the mountains to the Augustinian monastery of Roncesvalles, where a passport is issued to those with a letter of introduction. The passport is a requirement for staying at some of the hostels along the route. The hostel environment is not everyone's first choice of lodging, but sometimes it is the only choice besides camping. 6 weeks of walking for a healthy individual means this is more an adventure than a tourist-style vacation. Only certain hostels and hotels can issue a stamp on the pilgrim's passport. Author Hape Kerkeling tells his story of getting stamped in an ice-cold Albergue pilgrim hostel, then taking off for a good hotel. After a 16-mile trek that takes a full day in the rain, he does the same in the first town in Spain. The next stop in Spain is the tiny town of Zubairi, only about 6 or 7 miles away. It is a picturesque town and the reward for crossing a mountainous footpath most of the way. From Zubairi one gets the opportunity to take it easy for a day, as the road to Pamplona is large enough for cars and for the frowned-upon act of hitchhiking. One has to wonder, if they believe in purgatory, does cheating on the walk cause you to lose part, or all, of the reward? Pamplona is mostly known for its annual running of the bulls. It is also considered the capital of Navarre. This section of Spain is much more, however, and can boast a concentration of medieval curiosities from architecture and monuments left behind by Templars, Jews, pagans, and pilgrims. 12th century Templars built churches here, and many Templars were buried here. While they were often built in the octagonal style, here the Church of Santa Maria de Unate has a unique 33-arched octagonal cloister. The number 33 is, of course, sacred to both Templars and Freemasons. It is likely that initiatory rites were performed here. From Pamplona the pilgrims still have weeks of small cities, villages, and miles of footpaths. Numerous Templar places of interest include Puente la Reina, where the town is entered through an arch of a Templar foundation, El Crucifijo, a church with scallops and Celtic designs. Another much anticipated stop is the town of Estella. In 1090 a nightly shower of stars on the same place led to the discovery of a cave with a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Just before the end of the journey is the town of O Sobrero. Here a vial of the blood of Jesus was donated in 1486 by Ferdinand and Isabella. At one point, a mass being held by one priest and one parishioner saw the mass of the holy bread turn into real flesh and the wine turn into real blood. It so unnerved the priest, he died of shock on the spot. The one parishioner died shortly afterwards. The chalice is said to be the Galician Holy Grail. Is it real? 2 papal bulls declared it is. The last day of the Camino is 15 miles through forest to Santiago. Here one shows his or her passport and gets a certificate of completion. Hundreds wait in line for their Compostelas. Then the final step is to hear Mass in the cathedral. The church is crowded with hundreds of new arriving pilgrims, especially in the month of July, as this feast occurs on the 25th of the month. Pilgrims to the world's holy centers, including Rome, Jerusalem, and Mecca, mostly have no greater difficulty than buying an airline ticket. Those walking the way of St. James may need a much greater effort but may earn a much greater reward. For a quarter century, Atlantis Rising Magazine has been the go-to source for news of ancient mysteries, unexplained anomalies, holistic health, and future science, appearing on newsstands worldwide. Visit AtlantisRising.com, become a member of the Atlantis Rising Research Group and join the team.
The Tower of Babel question. One of the earliest Bible stories is that of the Tower of Babel. In Genesis 11 we read, "And the earth was of one tongue, and of the same speech." The people of Babel decided to build a tower so high that they could reach heaven. God said in Genesis 11:7, "Let us go down and there confound their tongue." After which, the language of the whole earth was confounded. Stories from the Bible can't, in many cases, be taken literally. They do, however, often reflect real historical events, although not to any exact standards. Some, like underwater archaeologist Robert Ballard, say evidence of the Great Flood can be found in the fact that the Black Sea was once a lake. The Mediterranean Sea was also, at one point in time, not connected to the Atlantic. Islands in that sea, like Malta and Sicily, only became islands after the sea level of the earth rose. The Sumerians told similar tales, and they also included impossible features, as they were intended to convey a moral tale. The story of Babylon's tower was originally described in a Sumerian text, and is depicted on a stele dating to 2300 BC. The Bible may have intended to tell a cautionary moral tale, but the Sumerians may have described a real event. Massive floods, drought, and any number of catastrophes could have broken up a worldwide civilization whose peoples then fled by foot and ship. A universal language? Could the earth have shared a language that only later became divided into numerous languages? Evidence for this may be found in the extended number of shared words that exist around the globe. Greetings today often involve a reference to God. Via con Dios is Spanish for "go with God." Namaste loosely means, "I recognize the God within you." At the time of the biblical story of Babylon, Eloah was the name of God, a name from which Allah, the god of Islam, is derived. In Greece, Haloa was the name of an annual festival to all the gods including Dionysius. Hiloha was the thunderbird of the Choctaw tribe. The earliest greeting we know in the English language is hello, which became hello. It was commonly used in Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. The name may have spread as far as Hawaii, where aloha is the greeting. The Bible tells us that the Jews wandered in the desert for 40 years. In times of near starvation, manna was a gift from God that sustained his people. In Hawaii and Tahiti, the word manna can refer to a form of spiritual energy and healing power. This spiritual quality has a supernatural origin. In New Zealand, the Maori culture has a similar meaning to the Hawaiian concept. It is believed one can gain or lose manna through one's actions. North American tribes share a nearly identical concept. Manna, or mana, was spiritual nourishment. The great spirit of these tribes is Manitou, who sent Manabozho to earth to bring culture. Manabozho was a white man like Ireland's hero Manannán Mac Lir. In Ireland, England, and Wales he is regarded as a god of the sea. Could it have been this culture hero who brought civilization to North America? He may have landed in Mannahatta, which became Manhattan. With a slight vowel change, Mona was the center of Druid power. This spiritual nourishment was also physical nourishment. It became a substitute name for the Christian Eucharist host. Manna may not be the only Hebrew-Hawaiian connection. The Hebrew word for priest is Cohen, and it is a family name as Kahane. In Hawaii, a kahuna is a medicine man or priest. He may be a powerful man as well, as in Big Kahuna. There are some who believe Hawaiians were part of the lost tribes of Israel. The number of customs of the Hawaiians corresponding to Hebrew practices is large and includes circumcision, offering of first fruits to the gods, and the custom of chiefs washing their hands at meals. The Hawaiians share a story of a man swallowed by a sea creature who survived, a deluge where man saved the animals, like Noah, and others. In the event of this early diaspora, the Hebrews might have been responsible for carrying their name far and wide. They may have called themselves after the 5 times great-grandfather of Abraham, Eber. Going west, the Semite peoples crossed Iberia, now Spain, and Portugal. The Romans called the Iberian Peninsula Hispania, but its original name meant the crossing. The Ebro River remains on the map today. Their destination might have been the modern-day Ireland, recorded as Hibernia, and the Hebrides of Scotland's west coast. The city of York was then named until the Norman invasion. Literally, hundreds of place names exist or existed in Europe, including the Kingdom of Iberia in Georgia. In Ireland, once Hibernia, is the goddess Danann, and her people are called the Tuatha de Danann. In nearby Scandinavia, the male god was Donner, who became Thor. Among his people are the Danes. Circa 1200 BC, the Chardin Sea peoples who settled Sardinia invaded the Mediterranean. In Israel, one of the lost tribes was that of Dan. Further east in India is Danu, the mother of the gods. In Russia is Danitsa, the wife of the moon god. In Siberia they are the Din people, and in America the Navajo called themselves Dine. Many rivers share the name of gods, such as the Danube, the Don, Dniester, and the Jordan. The science of language. Students of linguistics admit that they mostly rely on theories. However, one language stretched from India to England that is called Proto-Indo-European PIE, 1,364 words common over that great distance, point to its being a reality. Today most people use about 5,000 words in their vocabulary. Even older than PIE is the concept of a Nostratic language that covered the planet. In this theory, words shared in the PIE language are held in common with places as far away as the Aleutian Islands off Alaska. Linguistic students believe that 50,000 years ago humans could only pronounce the letter A. They believe that circa 30,000 years ago Cro-Magnon man spoke and communicated. Then 20,000 years ago, a Nostratic language, which may have had its base in Eastern Africa, spread throughout the world. Linguists believe in many cases that the several thousand languages today share numerous words for basic concepts, body parts, family relationships, and aspects of the natural world. And proponents of the theory show how it is demonstrated. The most common word for mother is ma. It may be one of the first words. The sound made during breastfeeding is this M sound. M, as a nasal consonant, is closely related to that one other nasal consonant, N. Together they are a basis for the other basic mother, mom, and nana words. M words may have given us milk and moon. In the Far East, Ma expressed the concept of a maternal clan. In Egypt, Ma'at was a goddess who personified truth. Ma'at weighed a man's soul against a feather. Among the Greeks, Maia was the wife of Pan. Maya vocabulary included Maya as an important deity. The Iranian moon goddess was Ma or Alma. In Hebrew, the sacred letter M and A made the Mem Aleph a holy sign incorporating birth and fluid. A Hindu sage was called a Mahatma, which literally means of great mother, although it would in modern times be considered masculine. The moon. One universal word was for the moon goddess. According to historian Joseph Campbell, on the Sinai Peninsula, sacrifices were made to her as the mother goddess. This was pre-2000 BC. On the Isle de Seine near Karnak was a druid oracle. 9 priestesses had a sacred vase that could predict the future. The Seine River was Dea Sequana. At the source of the river was a Gallo-Roman sanctuary to the goddess. In Ireland, Sinan was the granddaughter of the sea god Lur. The river Shannon preserves her name. The Sumerian god Sin was the son of a sea goddess, Tiamat. Tiamat gives her son the tablets of law. Sin names are found all over the planet. Sinchu in China, Singu in Burma, Sina in Iran, Singaida in Tanzania, and Sinto on Corsica. The list is long. The Chimu people of Peru and Colombia had a moon god, Sinan, like the Irish goddess, a river, the Sinu preserves this name. At the same time, Eastern Semites had a moon god Sin. Women's names like Cindy and Cynthia employ the Sin prefix, and in Finland and Norway, Sin is a popular girl's name. But at some point Sin became bad. It was sinister, a word shared with being left-handed. The real original sin, it has been argued, was wishing to be like God. Zachariah Sitchin questions the use of us in God's statement in Genesis. This first book has the Elohim, the plural for El, deciding to go down to earth to see the people they created. The thus in, let us go down, Sitchin thought, would actually be members of that alien race of people. The travelers from the stars had planted a seed that created through genetics a new race of man on Earth, humans. Sitchin further theorizes that from the start, their creation was not content being anything less than their creators. The story of Adam and Eve eating the apple, said Sitchin, was actually an attempt by humans to get the fruit of the tree of knowledge. This first sin caused them to be forced out of what was called Eden. The Sumerian word was Eden, meaning home, of the Din, people. Despite losing their first home, the humans prospered and never lost their curiosity over just what the gods could do. They saw their overlords ascending and descending from the skies and decided they would build a lofty tower to accomplish the same. Sitchin refers to it as a launch tower, but most depictions are simply a tower that can be climbed. He says that certain rebel gods sought to help them. Whatever the case, the gods became angry. A column preserved for thousands of years describes Enlil, possibly the strongest of the gods, as resorting to force. He destroyed the tower and caused man's speech to become confounded, so they could no longer plot against his power. The word for Babylon in Hebrew is Babel, and it gave us the word Babel, for anything not understood. It is significant because Babili meant gateway to the gods in the Akkadian language. Sitchin describes the event in the Wars of Gods and Men. The belief in a universal formation of language may not be hard to accept with literally thousands of words shared around the world. The belief in such an original language being broken into thousands of tongues by a catastrophic global event may be hard to accept. But there are two basic catastrophe theories that might account for both the shared words and the amounts of various languages. The first is the flood as recalled in Genesis. The second is the sinking of the continent of Atlantis. Ignatius Donnelly, writing in Atlantis the Antediluvian World, goes to great lengths in comparing Mayan words and letters to Phoenician and Egyptian characters. Historians consider both the flood story and the sinking of Atlantis to be myths. The confounding of a universal language by an angry group of extraterrestrial gods may also be equally difficult to accept, but the story of one universal tongue is one theme that unites them all.
Appearing on newsstands worldwide. Visit AtlantisRising.com, become a member of the Atlantis Rising Research Group and join the team.